Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today we have a very special guest. And I guess I've recorded probably 50, at least 50 at this point, amazing recovery stories of alcohol and drug addiction. And today we're going to actually talk to someone from the other side, the perspective of the family member and the loved ones that are affected by our addiction. So my guest today is Melisa S, who's been in recovery since July of 2000. She's a proud mom of 4, a brand new wife, and a new bonus mom to even more kids. Melisa's family life is big, blended, and full of love. There aren't any grandkids yet, but her pack of beloved granddoggies happily fills the gap. At home, she's got 2 dogs, a cat, and a husband she lovingly calls a normie. A SoCal native with her heart set on Chicago, Melisa is fueled by punk shows, live music of all kinds, books, museums, and thrifting treasures. She's got a quick wit, a big heart, and a love for pizza, tacos, and the 12 steps, which she says have reshaped her life and relationship in ways she could have never imagined. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Hi, Melisa.
Hi, Joe.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this podcast.
Well, I am so grateful for your willingness. I can tell you that. In all fairness, I have to tell everybody I had the opportunity to attend an Al-Anon convention, and Melisa was one of the featured speakers, and she was kind enough to come on the podcast and share her story with you. So I'm really excited about it. So what was it like growing up?
What it was like growing up was, I would say, equal parts fantastic and infuriating. I grew up in a small nuclear family, just my mom, my dad, my brother, and I, but I have a ton of cousins and aunts and uncles, and I lovingly refer to all of us, with the exception of those of us that didn't really have trouble with alcohol or drugs, as the Catholic Irish alcoholics, aka the C.I.A, because if I look at my family tree, I can see pretty easily all the way down the line which ones of us needed this meeting and which ones of us might have needed that meeting. And it was a great childhood, alcoholism notwithstanding. My first qualifier in life would be my dad, and he didn't find his sobriety until I was in my 50s, which means that he is in his 70s, and I think he has 6 or 7 years now. I don't count his days because that's not really my business, but it was interesting growing up. You learn how to keep secrets at a really young age, and you learn that not everybody is safe to hold those secrets. So there was some friends that it was okay to have them over at the house on a Friday night. I never knew what kind of drinking my dad was going to do. If it was the light colored liquid with the bubbles, we were probably going to have a good time. And if it was the dark colored liquid that required ice cubes, it probably wasn't going to be so much fun. But even in all of that, growing up with an active alcoholic and an untreated Al-Anon person, it was a fabulous childhood. We had so much fun. We spent weekends at my grandparents' house with all of my cousins and everybody just hanging around and eating food and, of course, drinking beer. But we got to play and be kids. And on Sunday mornings, my dad would get a wild hair and decide that we were going to go on an adventure. And sometimes we'd wind up in Hollywood, walking down Hollywood Boulevard and looking at the weirdos and the movie stars on the sidewalk. And sometimes it would be Venice Beach, and we'd go for a piece of pizza and put our feet in the water. And sometimes we'd be hiking in the forest. We never knew what kind of adventure we were going to get. And I didn't know until later on in life that the reason why that was probably because he wasn't sure how he was going to feel on Sunday morning, depending on whatever happened on Saturday night. But, growing up with functional addiction feels a little bit different than some of the stories I've heard from people in program about growing up with the other kind. And I think because I grew up with functional addiction, I didn't recognize it as addiction for a lot of years. I just didn't acknowledge that, because in my mind, an alcoholic was somebody that lived in a box on the street in downtown LA. It didn't look like somebody who had a great career and a nice house and a well manicured lawn, So at a young age, you understand those unspoken contradictions. And it's kind of like there was at least two versions of me at all times. As a kid, there was the home me and there was the school me. And I didn't like for those two to mix. And then when I got a little bit older, there was the me that I was with my friends. And then that kind of fractured even further into different groups, because I was one way with this group of friends and one way with that group of friends. And, I'm lucky I didn't wind up like Sybil with so many personalities, honestly. But I think the thing that stands out, lost an earbud. The thing that stands out the most for me in my growing up years is how adaptable I was to all of the different versions of my reality that there were. Kind of like a chameleon. And after being in Al-Anon for quite a few years and doing some step work, I realized that wasn't actually very useful. It really wasn't productive, but it was what I knew at the time. And I like to think of myself as like a bit of a juggler, even though I probably couldn't actually juggle any physical items. I sure juggled a lot of emotional ones. And you don't notice those things as they're happening as much as you notice them in hindsight once you get some recovery and you start to look at things through a different lens.
When you said the chameleon, it's like so familiar to me. My reaction to that, of course, was different than yours, but I always call that the early phase of my Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was different people, depending on where I was.
Exactly.
It was different. So
exactly.
I very relatable. I can understand it. And you mentioned Al-Anon. So before we get, some folks who are listening may not be familiar with Al-Anon or know what Al-Anon is. So would you mind sharing that?
Sure. Al-Anon is the 12-step recovery group that is geared towards the friends and family of alcoholics and addicts. So we use the same 12 steps as AA. We use the same 12 traditions, but our focus is from that of people who are impacted by somebody else's drinking or drug use. And I have a sponsor. She's my current sponsor. And she helped me to understand that from my point of view on the 12 steps is my drug of choice was people and relationships versus somebody else's drug of choice, maybe being alcohol or drugs. We do get sick and sometimes we do die from our disease, but we can find recovery just like an alcoholic or an addict can if we practice the principles of the 12 steps in our lives.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well said. Sorry, when you mentioned it, I was like, I had to ask, but so with your father was your initial qualifier, and then you mentioned relationships. So where do we go from there?
So I think, being young, I started off with relationships that were maybe not so healthy, being friendships. Like I'm the kind of person that if I love you, I like to say with my whole butt, because my butt's bigger than my heart. So I love you with everything that I have. And sometimes that can be a little intimidating, I think, because it's this big, messy, all encompassing, in your face, going to take up all the space in the room kind of love. And when I was young, that would be girlfriends of mine. I'd get so wrapped up in what was going on in their lives and how I could help them and let me make it better. And I have all these suggestions and I just want you to be happy and let me help you with that. And then as I got a little bit older, of course, you know, birds and bees come in and you start looking at boys different and you start thinking that one's cute and this one has cool hair. And, I like that one because he has that kind of leather jacket. So maybe I'll go talk to that guy. And then you start getting into the relationship side of things. And I remember the first time I heard the term, I have a broken picker. And I thought, I should probably be a little bit more offended at that than I am. But I wasn't, because it was true. I did not choose relationships based on whether or not that person was healthy. Like I said, refer to my previous comment. I once had a boyfriend in high school that the only reason why I went out with him was because I liked his leather jacket and I wanted to be able to wear it. Maybe not the best reason to choose spending time with somebody. But one thing that was common with all of the boys that I liked was I wanted to fix them. And I think that that urge to fix people came into play really early in my life, because for an Al-Anon personality type, or at least for this one, because things were out of control at home, I was unconsciously looking for other places to have control and to exercise that control. And for me, that looked like relationships. So once the friendships thing kind of settled down and ran its course and I fixed all my girlfriends, then I started turning towards fixing boyfriends. And I really liked the bad ones, because part of the other thing that happened in my childhood was I learned very quickly that if I followed the rules and did everything that everybody wanted me to do, then I wouldn't be in the fray if my dad happened to be in a bad mood when he drank. So my motivation was to be the good girl, follow the rules, do what I was supposed to, make people happy by bringing home good grades. And I can't say keeping my room clean because I never really did that very well, but I wanted to be the good girl. So that was perfect soil for a bad boy to swoop in and sweep me off my feet and make me think that he was wonderful and interesting. Because let's be honest, he was. All of them were. They were super interesting. I should have prefaced it earlier by saying I absolutely love alcoholics. They're fantastic people. Fantastic people. Just that their good personality traits got distorted by whatever substance they were choosing, just like Al-Anon's personality traits get distorted by whatever avenue we're trying to use, whether it's fixing, whether it's control, whether it's martyrdom, putting our hand to our forehead and doing the Al-Anon salute, because we do that. But yeah, I really like those bad boys, and when I was about 19 years old, I met the baddest of the bad boys and promptly fell completely in love, and painted all the red flags green and made all the excuses. And, well, I can fix him. I can fix this. I got this. I fixed my dad. Oh, yeah, I can handle this one. And I think I thought because he didn't drink alcohol that I wasn't going to have the same kind of problems, because I was aware enough to notice that alcohol was causing problems. And he didn't drink alcohol. So I thought I was in the clear, but I wasn't, because the substance that he chose was a hard drug, and that was a completely different animal that I had no experience with. And I was not prepared for the places it was going to take both of us for a lot of years.
So, do you mind sharing where it took you guys and how long it took to get there?
Sure. So, um, let's see, we were together for a total of 22 years, from dating to divorce, and we were married for 15. And in that time frame, I would say things started off really promising. He had this really cool career that he worked in, and we got married. We had this great big elaborate, fun, fancy wedding. 322 people came to our wedding, and a large chunk of them were actually related to me, because I have this great big, Irish Catholic family. So cousins, aunts, uncles, all these people. And my wedding to my first husband was referred to as the May 4th massacre in my family, because the after party that happened after the reception was over, because you only get a certain amount of time, right? So the after party went to my grandparents' house, my dad's parents, and couple of my uncles got into a knockdown, drag out fight with each other, and the cops were called, and the wives were getting involved, and it was just a big hullabaloo. And the family called it the May 4th massacre, and I wasn't even there. We were already, at the hotel waiting to fly out to Hawaii for our honeymoon, so we didn't even know what was going on until afterwards. But and the other thing that's funny about my first wedding is the music that I chose to walk down the aisle to. I just thought was this really beautiful instrumental piece from one of my favorite movies at the time, which was Braveheart. And I wanted something kind of ethnic in my wedding ceremony because I'm very proud of my Irish heritage. And so even though that's Scottish, that was close enough for me. And I didn't learn until years later that the title of that song actually was the battle hymn for the battle of, I think it was called, I don't remember. But anyway, it was the battle theme for Braveheart, and boy, didn't that turn out to be true. So we were married for a couple years. We had our first son, and then about halfway through my pregnancy with our daughter, who's our middle child, he told me that he had a drug problem, and I was floored. I felt like the wind had been taken out of my sails, the oxygen was gone from my lungs, and I didn't have feet to stand on. I didn't know what to do with that information. I do remember where I was when I heard it. I was standing on the toilet in our bathroom, leaning my head over the shower enclosure to talk to him while he was taking a shower. Because that's the kind of Al-Anon I am. I'm going to have the conversation whether you want to or not, and I'm going to get you where you can't get away from me, which in this case happened to be the shower. Poor guy. Poor guy. Couldn't even take a shower in peace. But there I am standing over the shower enclosure, and he's telling me that he has a drug problem, and I didn't know what to say. I mean, I'm a smart girl and I read a lot of books and I have a big vocabulary, and I had no response for that. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Okay, well, I guess I'll go to the library and I'll get a book, or I'll go to the bookstore and I'll buy something. And there's got to be some sort of manual on how to fix this. Like there's a manual on how to fix everything. I could fix this. And but I also didn't really believe that. Deep down in my heart, I knew that wasn't true. I just wasn't ready to know that yet. And went through the rest of my pregnancy and had that baby girl, and he got into some hot water with some choices that he had made, some guys he was involved with, and he got arrested, and it was federal. And he went to rehab to avoid going to prison, because at the time in Southern California, they had this thing called Prop 36 diversion court, where if you were having a substance abuse problem and you needed some help with that, they'd let you go to rehab in order to stay out of prison. So that's what he chose to do. And while he was there, he got himself a girlfriend. And I remember meeting her one time, and just, your spidey senses kind of go, and you get that hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you're like, ooh, something's not right about this. I don't know what it is, but something's not right. And so, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Back to the arrest. We had gone to the grocery store, Walmart actually, to get some diapers and some dog food. And we pulled up into our driveway. It was a cul-de-sac. And all of a sudden, there's cop cars flying in all directions, swooping up on our cul-de-sac. And we live in a fairly small town. It was smaller then than it is now, but we both, grew up there. We knew most of the people around town, and all these cop cars are showing up. And the neighbors are poking their heads out the door. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? And I took the kids in the house and was, trying to just be normal, I guess. And they put him in handcuffs and they put him in the back of the cop car. And I came back out to see what was happening. And I looked at him, and he just had his head back on the headrest and his eyes were closed. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know what you did, but whatever they think you did, you must have done it. I don't know what's happening next, but okay, here we go. Here we go. I wanted a bad boy, and here we go. And so that was the night that he went to jail. And I think it was while he was still in custody that a federal agent showed up at my door with a search warrant. And I answered the door in my nightgown. It was early in the morning. I wasn't expecting anybody. And I've got my daughter, got my baby on my hip, and I've got my nightgown on, and I just made a pot of coffee. And there's these federal agents standing on my doorstep with badges and a search warrant. And I felt like an episode of like Law and Order or something. I'm like, I don't even know what the heck I'm supposed to do with this. So I offered him a cup of coffee. I didn't know what else to do. And it was really uncomfortable because the agent was really handsome and I felt really awkward standing there in a nightgown looking at this man. I'm like, what in the heck is going on? Whose life is this? And I would love to tell you that that's the worst that it got, but it's not. Because when you start getting messy like that around drugs and alcohol, things kind of have a way of just building their own momentum, and that snowball just keeps rolling. And those federal agents came into the house. They knew right where to go and what they were looking for. And he thanked me on the way out and told me to have a good day. And I thought, well, that's a weird thing to say. But, he was just doing his job. And there had been other times throughout those years where, one thing or another, he was involved with some sketchy characters. We had a gang of motorcycle enthusiasts, we'll call them, showed up on the front porch, and this grizzled looking guy with a beard and gray hair and more lines on his face than I have freckles. And he said, I need to look in your garage and I need to look in your backyard because I'm just making sure that some stolen stuff isn't here. And your husband said I could do that. So you just need to get out of the way and let me do what I need to do. And he was not the type of person that you argued with. So I let him do what he needed to do. And I remember looking around the corner past him and there was all these guys strategically placed around my cul-de-sac. And I thought, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? Like, this might be too much. Federal agents is one thing, but these characters are a different deal, and that's the escalation that happens when we're not well. Things just go from bad to worse until we decide to do something different. And I think when he was in rehab, and he got that girlfriend, and I found out about that just crushed me. And I did not have a very appropriate response because he came up to see our children. I kicked him out, of course. We had lots of those making threats that I didn't have any intention of carrying out. That was kind of my MO. And I did that a lot. And I had asked him to leave the house. And so he did. And he came up to visit our kids. And I needed to go for a drive. I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave for a little bit. I'm going to go for a drive, play my music loud, and try and clear my head. And right before that had happened, he had bought this really obnoxious car. It was a Lexus IS 300, and they were brand new. He bought it brand new off the showroom floor, and it was the brightest yellow with chrome rims and blacked out windows, and it was flashy and obnoxious, and I hated it. I hated that car. I have such a resentment against that car. I actually put it on my first fourth step. But somehow we wound up on the road at the same time. He was in front of me and I was behind him. And I always make jokes. I used to make jokes about people when they would say that, something happened and I just lost control of myself. I don't know what I did. I was like, yeah, right. That's not real. Until it happened to me. Because the way my higher power works is he puts me in situations so that I can experience that very thing that I said would never happen, or experience that circumstance that I was judging somebody else for. He's like, you're pointing your finger at somebody else, but 3 others are pointing back at you, and I'm going to show you why, because that's how my higher power works. So I got into an accident, and I say accident loosely. The only reason why I call it an accident is because I wasn't really in control of my own responses at that time. But I drove straight into the back of that ugly yellow Lexus. And that's a crazy thing to say. Like, I'm the responsible girl. When I was working before I started having babies, I worked at an aerospace company. I had a security clearance. I got A's in school. Like, I was a good girl. And here I am doing this absolutely insane thing. And I was completely sober. I did not have the benefit of having, lack of sobriety as an excuse. And I drove into the back of him and we went around a corner and his car did a 180 and I hit him head on. And it wasn't until I hit him the second time that I snapped back into myself and looked at what was happening and thought, oh my God, what did I do? What am I doing right now? And I think I just had this flood of emotions of like embarrassment and fear and terror, really, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And, there's police cars and pedestrians and all these bystanders, and people were just, what in the heck? Because this was way before social media, so there was nobody out there with their iPhone recording this mess, thank God. But oddly enough, is it odd or is it God, is what I'll say. The same officer that arrested me was the one that had arrested him a few months prior for the situation that he was in. And he looked at me and he said, I remember you. Do you remember me? And I had to think about it for a minute. And I said, I think so. And he said, I arrested your husband. And I said, oh, wow. Yep, I remember you. And he said, what happened to you? And I pointed at my husband and I said, he did. And he kind of just looked at me and he goes, well, I got to take you to jail. And I'm like, yeah, I figured that. And at the time, it's funny now, but it wasn't really funny at the time. But two things about my arrest. I was wearing a t-shirt from a band that I like named Joy Division. And they have a song that they're real famous for called Love Will Tear Us Apart. And that's the shirt that I was wearing. I would give anything to have a copy of that mugshot. Let me tell you what. And he took me to jail, and bless his heart, he did everything wrong. He didn't Mirandize me properly, I found out later, and he didn't handcuff me properly. Like the cuffs were in front of me instead of in back of me. He did all these things wrong. And when I got to the jail, they asked me if I had any tattoos. And at the time I just had one. Now I have like, I don't know, 20 or something. But I had to show them my tattoo and let them take a picture of it. And they're finishing up their booking process, excuse me, and the officer asked me if I had any questions. And I said, just one. I said, if I get more tattoos, do I need to let you know? And they all looked at me like, who is this crazy lady? And he says, ma'am, with all due respect, I hope I never see you again. I thought, okay, well, I mean, I just didn't know. Like, I really didn't understand that kind of stuff. So I got arrested and I was in jail overnight, which is a crazy thing to say. I like to say that my reaction to his infidelity was that I broke out in handcuffs. I make jokes about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time. And I remember sitting there thinking like, wow, I have made some choices here, and I was in Al-Anon at the time. I was going to meetings. I say I was in Al-Anon. I was not in recovery. I was in Al-Anon, and there's a difference. And I think maybe some other people that listen to the podcast can relate to that because I was going to meetings, but I wasn't really doing the work. And I'm pretty sure that's why I still went so far, down the road on my own crazy train. Because if I had really been doing the work, I probably wouldn't have responded to that situation the same way. So there's a difference between being around it and being in it.
So, when did you not, and not, I'm not trying to, don't skip ahead if you don't want to skip ahead. I was just thinking like when you said it's like, when did you get in it?
Yeah. After that arrest, I went to court. My parents hired me a lawyer, and the judge was a member of the program, which I didn't know until later. But and like God was always doing things like that for me. He was always working in the background. He was always watching out for me and keeping me safe, and I didn't even know it yet. And because the judge was in the program, she was not willing to have me put in prison. My original charge was felony assault with a deadly weapon, as it should have been. What I did was ridiculous. And my lawyer was able to, with her help, get it pled down to a misdemeanor charge of, I believe it was either spousal abuse or assault. And the district attorney wanted me to go to jail. And the judge said, no, we're not doing that. She's a mother. She's got two small kids at home. And the other party in this situation is clearly in no condition to be taking care of children. So we're going to let her go to anger management classes and do some community service. And I say some lightly because I got 1,800 hours of community service. And I don't know too many other people that have had that many hours, but I had a year of anger management classes, and I'm grateful for that because I learned a lot from that class. I learned that I'm not as crazy as I thought I was, which was great. And I learned that I never wanted to be in that position ever again. I never wanted to be in a place where I lost control of myself because that wasn't his fault. That was my fault. I wasn't doing what I needed to do with my program. I wasn't in touch with a solid higher power. I wasn't working steps. I was just going to the meetings and getting relief, but I wasn't doing work. So it was after that I really buckled down and got serious about getting into the steps and working through those with a sponsor, doing my first fourth step, and just really getting honest with myself about the things that I had allowed to happen. My sponsor taught me the concept of I was not a victim, I was a volunteer. And I had never heard that before she said that to me. And that is something that I share with my sponsees, because it's really important for us to move past that victim mindset. Because if we don't do that, we're never going to get better. If it's always about what he, she, they, them does to us, and we never look at our own part, we're never going to get better. So it was after that car accident and going through those anger management classes and all that I started to get really serious about my program. And that's when I started really getting better.
So what was your first, like in recovery, like what was your first steps towards that? Like what was that early recovery like?
So my very first sponsor, and you might have heard me share about this at the convention, I chose my very first sponsor because I liked her tattoos. And she had a license plate holder that was based on one of my favorite punk bands. So I thought, oh, well, she must be cool. She's probably got it together, and her and I'll have something in common, and she won't think I'm weird. So I'm going to ask her to be my sponsor. I did zero work with that sponsor. I never once cracked a book. I never got any suggestions. In fact, we never even met for coffee. So my second sponsor was somebody that I had for probably the first, I would say, let's see, that happened in 2001. It's like the first 5 or 6 years of my recovery. I had the first sponsor. She's a wonderful woman. I took the advice of somebody else at a meeting, which is to choose someone who had what I wanted. And I looked at her life and I saw that her and her husband had a good relationship, and they were both in program. And, sometimes they would do split pitches together. And I just thought that was really cool. And she seemed to be comfortable in her own skin, and she was laughing all the time. And I thought, well, I want to get back to that. So I chose her to be my sponsor. And I did do some work with her, but she was the sponsor that I had when I was still kind of dancing around the steps instead of really being in them. So it was while I was still with her, the tail end of our work together, and I went to a retreat for the weekend. And it wasn't any one specific step. It was just like a book study retreat. And it was up in the mountains in Wrightwood, California, and it was beautiful. It was snowy and it was peaceful. We were in this cute little A-frame with a wood burning stove, and it was the first time that I was brave enough to leave my alcoholic spouse for any length of time and not, pay attention to what he was doing or not doing every hour of every day. And I was really scared about what he was going to do while I was gone, which is silly, right? But that's where I was at. And I went to that retreat and I did some baby step work. I kind of started understanding what it looked like to really be serious about my recovery besides just giving it lip service. And it took me another few years before I actually got really serious. My first sponsor and I think I just needed somebody that was a little bit more harsh. If I can say this word, I needed someone that was going to kick my ass. I needed that, like somebody that was going to call me on my baloney and tell me you're not getting anything done here.
Yeah.
And so that's when I found my second sponsor, which is the one that I still have. And we went to a women's retreat in Monterey, California, at a former convent, and I did my first fourth step there, surrounded by all of these really serious, like ninja Al-Anons. Like these women were black belts. They'd had 20 years, 30 years of recovery, and they sponsored all kinds of people, and they had no time for anybody's nonsense. Like, you either wanted to get better or you need to get out of here, because we're not holding your hand and we're not going to make it comfy. This is ugly work and you need to get into it. And I really resonated with that, and that's when I started to get better. That's when I did my first fourth step, and really, and my sponsor is a double winner, so she works things from a hybrid AA Al-Anon standpoint, and I really resonate with that. That works good for me because I need that harsh edge. And I got a lot of work done with her in a really quick period of time. And she was with me during my court case. She was with me during my divorce, and she walked me through all that really ugly stuff. But she also showed me how to do it on my own by using the steps as my framework and my filter. So anything that I was going through, whether it was arguments with the in-laws, who I referred to as the outlaws, or, my spouse until we got divorced, because we didn't get divorced for another maybe 5 or 6 years, I think. I'm trying to, 2011. Yeah, 5 years. We didn't get divorced for 5 years after the accident. In that time, we had had another baby, and not to try and fix the relationship or anything. That was just what God put on our plate. And my ex-husband was sober when our last child was born, so we got to experience the birth of a child with sobriety, which was actually really cool. Unfortunately, that sobriety didn't last, but what did last was me being committed to my recovery. And I say that with the caveat of I still wasn't always pleasant. I had that smug and self-righteous thing down to a science. Because even though I was going to meetings and I had a sponsor, I was always taking it back. Like I'd give it to God and I'd take it back. I'd give it to God and he wasn't working fast enough. So, all right, don't you know who I am? I'm going to fix this faster. So let me give it another go. And that's that insanity. We just do that same thing over and over again, expecting that this time it's going to work out different. And it never does. It just never does. And I got to a point where, he was kind of in and out of his sobriety. I was still going to my meetings. I was doing the things that I needed to do. I was starting to take up more commitments at like a group level. I was participating in committees and doing chair work on those things and getting busier. And I just really didn't have as much time to pay attention to whatever he was or wasn't doing. I'm sure he was relieved. I know I was. But then I think it was about, I'm not going to remember what year it was, but he got a phone call at work one day, and it was a man on the other end of the phone that told him that he was going to have to pay for what he did. When he got in trouble with those federal agents, he took the opportunity to be an informant in that case, and some people went to prison for that. And this gentleman called and said that he was one of those people, and now there was going to be a price to pay. And he told my kid's dad that he needed to come up with like a really large sum of money by the end of the week or they were going to kill him. And he called me and told me that story. And I called my sponsor and I said, I think I need to leave. And she said, I think you're right. So I packed my kids up and we took off and went to another state, and we lived in another state for about 6 months. I disappeared from social media. I pulled the kids out of school. We were staying with family, but I wasn't really telling anybody where I was at. And I told him, you're going to need to clean up your mess because I can't be a part of this. I got to take care of these kids and you need to fix this. And he agreed, and he was, trying to get taken care of to the best of his ability. But that was a really scary time. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is really weird. Like, I'm in recovery and we're so far away from this event, but this stuff's still popping up. I wonder how many more times this is going to happen and how many more times am I just going to roll with this punch? I'm standing at the ocean, holding my hand up, trying to hold the waves back. Because even in recovery, I was still trying to manage an unmanageable situation. And I think a lot of people do that still. We love that other person and we want that family to be restored and we want to be healthy and happy and we have that dream for ourselves. And what I was starting to see, God was doing this thing where he was like tapping me on my shoulder and saying, hey, I need you to look at this. And I wasn't looking. And then he'd shake me. He'd say, are you listening yet? And then he's like, all right, well, hold on, girl, because here comes a wallop. And then he just whacked me across the face with something I could not deny. And I was like, all right, you know what? I might need to do some different things here. And, we were still married for a couple years after that, but it was different after that because I thought this stuff's going to stick. These things, these messes that were created in the past still have consequences moving forward. And I don't know how much I can deal with that. I have an autoimmune disease that I believe came largely from the stress that I put myself under in my former marriage and the way I was living my life and not taking care of myself and not eating properly. And I had an endocrinologist at the time that I went into our little adventure in Arizona, and he gave me a large supply of medicine up front so that I wouldn't have to worry about it. And he said, if you tell me what name you want your prescriptions filled under, I will send them to a pharmacy under assumed name for your safety on one condition. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, I need you to get a divorce. And I thought that was nuts, like, because I'm dealing from an Al-Anon perspective, right? In the 12 steps, we don't tell people what to do. We help you figure it out for yourself, but we don't make suggestions like that. And I thought, sir, you're outside your lane. And he goes, I am your doctor and I'm in charge of your health. He said, and if you don't get together and start taking better care of yourself, your kids are going to be without their mother. And I just thought, oh, wow. All right. And that stuck with me. It's like that little mustard seed, that gets planted and we're waiting for it to come and grow. And I kept going to my meetings. stayed in touch with my sponsor even when I was there in the other state. And eventually it was safe for us to come home after about 6 months. And so we did, but things were different after that. I was starting to feel the weight of what I know now was the decision that I wound up making, which was to leave. And I'd love to say that it was all, sunshines and rainbows and fuzzy kittens after that, but it wasn't, because my kid's dad wasn't sober, and he didn't get sober for another, gosh, I don't know, 10 years maybe. So I am here to tell you that co-parenting with an active addict is an absolute oxymoron. It's not a thing. You're not doing it. You're shouting into a tunnel. Nobody's hearing you. And I was not pleasant to deal with, because I had done enough work in the steps to be fed up with the way everything was going, but I hadn't worked through all of them yet. So I still thought maybe I had some control, or maybe, he owed me better behavior. I think I thought that if he only had to be a parent every other weekend, that he'd be really good at it. And what I failed to remember was that alcoholism and addiction are a disease, and you are only as sick as your secrets. So whatever you're trying to hide is going to come back for you. And I wasn't trying to hide what was going on in my family anymore, because that imploded, and I had diarrhea of the mouth. I just told everybody what was going on all the time, because you should feel bad for me and all these terrible things that I'm going through. And, that's not healthy. That didn't do either one of us any favors. And it certainly kept things messier than they need to be. But, I think I was just looking for allies. I wanted to feel like I wasn't alone. And I didn't always put that in the proper place, which was sharing in a meeting or sharing with my sponsor, because recovery is not linear. We do it in a lightning bolt. Some days we're rock stars and we get it all the way right. And then we kind of plateau a little bit, and then something happens and maybe we drop back down before we can propel ourselves forward, But the important thing is that I stuck with the program, and I took suggestions from people that had more time than me. And I took suggestions from people in my life that I trusted, that doctor being one of them. And I started doing a better job of taking care of myself. And I just kind of started climbing steady forward. I had no idea what it was going to look like when I got divorced. We led a comfortable life, even though he was an active addict. He had a great career, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was really scared about what that was going to look like. How am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to take care of these kids? Where am I going to live? What am I going to drive? And when I tell you that my higher power took all of that away from me, I mean, he took all of it. He took the car. He took I called it my Barbie dream house. He took the Barbie dream house away. He said, you know what, girlfriend, you're going to go live in this little house over here in this neighborhood that you don't like, that you don't think is good enough for you. And I'm going to show you why it is. And he spent the next, however many years it's been since 2013, proving to me why this little house was perfect and why it was exactly what we needed. And he humbled me. I would have thought that I was a humble person if you had asked me before my divorce, but I really don't think I was. I think I was complacent, and I think I thought I deserved the things that I had because I was a good person. I was a good wife. I was a good mom. And I thought this is the way my life is supposed to go. But what my higher power showed me in a really gentle way was that my life was supposed to be what I worked for, and that I was only going to get out of it what I put into it. And that's when I think the rubber really started meeting the road, because I hadn't worked in 12 years. And I was lucky enough that a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine's husband, ran a restaurant, and they needed some help at that restaurant. And he did not give me a job. He gave me an interview. And it took a lot of courage for me to go and interview as a person who was going to be cleaning tables and delivering food and, working in a restaurant. I hadn't done that since I was in high school, and I really had to humble myself to go on that interview, but I did it. My sponsor said we suit up and we show up, and you're going to go to that job interview and you're going to give it your best bet. And if you get it, cool. And if not, something else will come along. But I did get that job, and it turned out to be really great. I learned a lot about myself and about people and about how to conduct myself in a responsible, mature manner working at that job. And it was perfect. It was exactly what I needed at the time. And everything that came after that was the same. I went from that job to a little bit better job. And then after that one, a little bit better one. And I just kept getting a little bit better and a little bit better all along. But it started with me being willing to be humble and realize that I didn't deserve anything. I didn't have anything coming to me but what I was willing to work for.
So, wow. So what are some of the gifts that, some of the greatest gifts that you've gotten since, in your recovery?
Oh my goodness. I love that perspective because something I tell people, like whether I'm sponsoring them or whether we're just people that meet up at a meeting, is I always encourage people to go to open AA meetings because I think it's so important, especially for us as Al-Anons who often feel really hopeless about somebody else's drinking or drug using. We feel like that person we love is never going to get better. And when you go to an open AA meeting and you hear speakers and you hear people sharing their own recovery, you realize it's real. They do get better, and they get better when they're ready to get better. And that helps me put my focus where it needs to be. So I think open AA meetings are a huge gift. And my own growth, my own recovery is a gift because I never would have gone to Al-Anon if I hadn't been married to that man. I didn't go to Alateen when I was younger because that structure that I was growing up in was we keep those secrets. We don't talk about our problems outside the house. And so Alateen was never an option, and therapy certainly wasn't on the table. So I never made it to recovery until I was in that crazy marriage. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And some of my very dearest friends came because I met them at an Al-Anon meeting. I probably wouldn't have crossed paths with those people before. I hadn't up until that point, but some of my very best friends came from Al-Anon. And I learned that it's not only is it possible, but it's very real to be super happy. We would go to the meeting. My home group was a Monday night meeting, and it was about half a mile away from my house. And we would go to the meeting, and then we would have what we call the meeting after the meeting at my house. And people would come back and sit on my patio in my backyard in what I call my hobbit house, this weird little place in this funky little neighborhood that I never thought I would live in. And we'd have tea and we'd tell stories and we'd laugh and we had so much fun. And I always felt safe and I always felt appreciated. When I moved out of the Barbie dream house, my kid's dad had already come and taken the things that he wanted, and it was a 3,800 square foot house, and we had lived there for 8 years times 5 people. There was a ton of stuff in that building, and I didn't know where I was going to put it all. I went and rented a storage unit because we had to go live with my parents for a while. But the day that I was moving out of that house, I can't remember if it was 22 or if it was 27, but it was 20 plus people, most of them men that I had not met from AA that were told by a sponsor, "Hey, you got something to do on Saturday morning. Be at this address at this time." And all these people showed up with this fire brigade of humans just loading these boxes out of my house, and I was so completely overwhelmed by that support. Some of these guys knew my kid's dad and they knew us when we were married, and some of them didn't. And just people just came out of the woodwork to help my kids and I get out of that house and get started on the next part of our journey. And stuff like that happened all the time. When I was super broke, later on in our story, when we were divorced, he got arrested again federally and actually went to prison this time and was gone for 5 years. And during that period of time, I didn't have child support, and I was trying to, I worked 2 jobs, and my parents helped us out, and I had no money for anything other than necessities. And I had girlfriends in the program and out who paid for me to get my hair done or paid for me to go get my nails done. They brought gifts over to my kids. Like, people in the program and out of the program just showed up for us all the time in the most amazing ways. And that's because they listened to a God of their understanding that said, "Hey, you need to do something nice for somebody, pay it forward." And they listened to that. And I will always be grateful to the rooms of AA and Al-Anon for putting those people in my life, because I wouldn't have made it through those days if it wasn't for program people. I say all the time, I wish everybody could go to a 12-step meeting. Like, I wish they taught this in school. I know it wouldn't work because we get there when we need to be there, but man, it's a good structure to live your life by.
Yeah, it really is. Well, it saved my life, and I'm so grateful for that.
Mine too,
So
friend. Mine too.
what so what are some of your favorite tools that you use
Mm.
when you're struggling, or or even on a good day?
So So that's the thing. I haven't lived with active alcoholism or addiction in many years. The wonderful man that I'm married to now, I call him a normie because he doesn't seem to suffer from any of the diseases that I have or that somebody else has. He's just out there living his life in this really awesome, normal way with this unclouded brain, and if it gets a little fuzzy, he knows where to put it. He just knows. Nobody had to tell him. He just knows. And that blows my mind. I have so much respect for that. But he's such a good influence on me because he keeps me positive and he understands me right where I'm at, and I'm really grateful for that. But when I think one of the first times he spent the night at my house, I had the Just for Today bookmark on it's tucked into the mirror in my bathroom. And he asked me what it was about. And when I first started dating him, I told him, like, hey, I have this thing that I do on Monday nights and I'm going to do it forever. I don't do it anymore because that meeting, unfortunately, is no longer. But I said, I'm going to do this thing and I talk with these people and I read these books and it's just part of my life. And I hope you can be okay with that. And he didn't totally understand it, but he got it. And he saw that bookmark and he kind of asked me some questions about it. And I was like, oh, it's just something that I read while I'm brushing my teeth. And I do. I actually picked up a new one at the convention recently because mine was all covered in toothpaste and a little crusty. So the Just for Today bookmark, front and back, because I can do anything for 12 hours that would appall me if I thought I had to do it forever. And that was a perspective that was really good for me. My very dear friend Tracy C taught me to do the alphabetical gratitude list. So you start with A and you say what you're grateful for that starts with A. And I will tell you, Joe, there was some days where all I could think of was air. I was grateful that I had air in my lungs. Couldn't think of anything else. But it's really hard to be in a bad mood or sitting in your pity pot if you're also trying to practice gratitude, because those two things can't exist at the same time. Just like you can't be actively having a resentment against somebody if you're also praying for them to have all of the good things that you want in your life. And my sponsor taught me to pray for the people that were getting under my skin or getting my anger up or whatever it was. And our daily readers, the One Day at a Time, the Courage to Change, something that I do now that I didn't always do was I read it in the beginning of my day instead of at the end of the day. It's a lot more useful in the morning. Because I used to like read it at night and compare all the things that went wrong to what the reading said for the day instead of doing it the other way around. I'm a slow learner, man. I'm a little backwards. I do things funky, but I read it in the morning. And the other thing that I do is when I'm feeling some type of way about something and like maybe my sponsor isn't available or I'm not in a place where I can make a phone call, I just go in the back and I look up all of the pages that have to do with that thing that I think I'm feeling. Like if it's anger, for example, I'll read all the pages on anger. And then while I'm doing that, a lot of times that'll lead me to another feeling, which is maybe resentment or fear or something else. And then I'll read all the pages for that. Next thing I know, I've been reading for 20 minutes and I forgot what I was twisted up about. And, that's a public service really, because I'm the type of Al-Anon that when I get angry, I want you to be feeling the same way I'm feeling. So I'm going to say some mean things and I'm probably going to hurt your feelings. And I'm not bragging about that. That's just the way that I conducted myself when I wasn't well. And now, maybe it's not the best, impetus, but a lot of times I don't say the mean things simply because I don't want to have to make an amends. So I will stop myself short and I will practice contrary action. If my idea is to get on the phone and read you the riot act, I'm actually going to turn my phone off and put it on the other side of the room. Maybe I'm going to go clean the floor. I have a sponsor who used to tell me to count my light switches and then call her back and tell her how many light switches I had in my 3,800 square foot house. And she didn't care how many light switches I had. She just wanted to give me a task that was going to take me out of my funk long enough for my higher power to get in there and give me some peace. So I suggest that same thing to people. Obviously, go into meetings. If you can't make it to a meeting, hop on a podcast. I love that this is something that's available to people because I can listen to this anytime. Listen to speaker meetings online. Call somebody, not text them, call them. If texting is the best that you can do because of your work schedule and everything, that's fine for a little while, but actually hear someone's voice and hear your own saying the things, because I know for me at least, I can think something and it sounds pretty reasonable up there in between my two ears, but when I say it out loud, holy cow, I realize how crazy that sounds. Like, do you hear yourself, woman? What are you thinking? Some of my best ideas were not good at all, um, and just halt. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If I'm any of those things, I do not get to be taking any action or making any decisions. I need to resolve whatever I'm feeling attached to that acronym before I take any other steps. My sponsor also taught me the acronym WAIT, which is why am I talking? I realize I'm on here on a podcast and I'm talking a lot, but prior to getting more healthy in the program, I never shut up. And I wasn't speaking wisdom. I wasn't speaking kindness. I was just running my mouth to anybody that would listen. So why am I talking? Is there anything that I really need to say here? Or can I just listen? Because when I'm listening, I will hear something. I always get a gift out of that. It's those meetings that are so hard to get to. Like, it's the last thing you want to do at the end of your day. You don't want to put your shoes back on and go back out in the weather. You don't want to drive to that meeting, but those are always the best meetings. Those are the ones you hear so much goodness and so much recovery in. And I think that I will, no, I don't think, I know, I will always use the tools that I have learned in the 12 steps and through working them and from connecting with other people. I'll use those for the rest of my life. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't have active alcoholism or addiction in my household today, but I know that this too can pass. This too shall pass, holds for the good things and the bad things. And one thing I know for sure is that my higher power never puts me in a position that he hasn't already prepared me to deal with. He's already given me everything that I need to deal with the situation before I get there. I just got to trust him. And speaking of that, I better plug my phone in. My battery's getting low. I'm just going to scoot to the side here and plug this in. So I apologize if you hear the.
No, you're good. And I appreciate everything that you've shared and the tools that you use. It's so, it's. I think that was one of the things that I realized is we may come to these steps in a different for different reasons, but they are so powerful. Have been so powerful for me to learn how to live, a different way of life. It's a couple things you said. You had talked about the resentment prayer, which I love. The resentment prayer. I had to use it in my life. May whoever the person have everything good in their life I would ever want for myself. And I always say as a caveat to that just know they may get it, because that happened to me and it started a whole nother resentment. But that's a whole.
You know what? I completely agree. Because you know what? Like I said, my higher power does this thing for me where he's like, oh, I'm going to put you in a situation to see how well you're going to handle that. You said you got it? Well, let me see it. And yeah, I relate to that because same.
Same. And I think that, kind of what you were saying about counting the light switches and that kind of stuff. I think what recovery has given me is the pause, before I act, and it's an amazing thing. But thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you for letting
incredible.
me. Thank you for letting me.
And but I can't let you go without our rapid fire question.
All right, let's have it.
If you are ready, Melisa.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Bring it on.
All right. So what is your favorite recovery slogan?
Man, that's tough. Just to pick one. The first one that pops to my mind is let go and let God. Because the other way I learned to hear that was let go or be dragged.
It's true. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, I've never been asked that one before. My least favorite. I don't know. I don't know if it's one of our approved slogans, but it's something that I've kind of said for myself, which I only say it's my least favorite because it took me so long to come to terms with it, which is acceptance is not approval. Just the word acceptance. Acceptance that's my least favorite. That was the A word for a long time because I didn't want to accept it. It was unacceptable. Why should I have to accept it? But in working through that, the first 3 steps is for me how I got to a real solid place of acceptance. And once I realized that acceptance is not approval, then I could move forward and deal with whatever the situation was. But I had a hard time with acceptance. That was the A word at my house for sure.
What do you think is your recovery superpower?
Ooh, research. I would say research, because not everybody, at the time I was only married to one person, but I had 2 mother-in-laws. And I always say that's really unfair because one's more than enough. But with that first husband, I had 2 mother-in-laws. And the second one was around recovery, and she had this box of literature that she's like, I think you need this more than I do, so I'm going to give it to you, and you should read all of these books. And I was like, whatever. But she gave me this treasure trove of Al-Anon literature, and I was so excited. I mean, I've given away most of those books by now, but research, I really dove into the history of the program and what the connections were between Al-Anon and AA, and what was the same and what was different. And reading the big book, although the chapter to the wives pissed me right off the first time I read it. But but I think most of us have that reaction. But then I read it again later on with, a different perspective, and it meant a lot more to me. And so I guess just doing the research, reading the literature, looking into archives, checking out, all the different books, because we have so many books, reading the Forum, which is our monthly magazine, and just reading those stories and hearing from other people and what they've been through.
That's pretty cool. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
You're going to be okay, and it gets better. And I know that sounds so simple, but like, she didn't always know that. She didn't know that there was any better to have, and she didn't know how good it was going to get. And she really didn't know that it was going to be okay. And it's anything. And I know this is kind of a common thing with recovery, but like, I had no idea how much better God was going to put my life back together in front of my eyes when I did the work that I needed to do. Like, everything I thought I lost, everything I thought that, was, and it was painful, but all of those things that hurt me and all of the situations that were uncomfortable or ugly or whatever, I got it back 10 times, way more than I could have imagined. It's amazing.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Ooh, good question. Well, there's a song by the Red Clay Strays called God Does, and I really like that one right now. That's kind of one of my favorites. And then the other one that I've leaned on for a long time, I actually got, let's see, I don't know if you can see it if I turn it this way. This way? Can you see my arm? I don't know. I have a tattoo about it. It's called Famous Last Words by My Chemical Romance. And that one's a little bit more of an aggro edge. That's when I'm feeling a little spicy, but one of the lyrics in that song is awake and unafraid. And that's how I feel when I'm connected to my higher power, when I'm saying my prayers, when I'm staying in my lane. I feel awake and unafraid.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
More time in my day to do things. More time in my day to spend with my program.
What step do you love the most?
The 4th. It was the one I was the most afraid of. It was the one I dragged my feet on. I mean, I think it was 2 years before I did my first 4th step, and I think I've done 6 now. Yeah. I love the 4th step. I love it so much.
What step do you love the least?
The first one.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Anything by John Hughes. I think John Hughes is a genius.
Yes. I had to give a yes shout out for that one.
Yeah.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, good and faithful servant.
That's really awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melisa. I think you've shared a perspective that, people need to hear, and I think will appreciate. And you've shared a lot of hope. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So for the rest of you out there, please subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of The Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. Visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please like, follow, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a great day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.